My phone tumbled from my grasp, hitting the ground with a sharp crack. The display remained lit, frozen on that single image. There she was, my daughter Bessie, radiant in white lace, standing beside a man I'd barely met. "Bessie, you're married?" "Yeah, Mama. Yesterday." Through the receiver came the ambient noise of city life. Traffic humming, footsteps echoing, distant conversations, but no trace of joy in her voice. "Why didn't you say anything? Why wasn't I there?" "It was just intimate, Mama. Family only." That word echoed in my skull. Family. I lifted the phone, staring at that captured smile on the screen, and suddenly everything became clear. Perhaps I'd become nothing more than an afterthought, someone who existed outside the frame of her new life. I erased the image, and in the emptiness that followed, one question formed that still haunts me. What happens when a mother realizes she's no longer considered family? If you're enjoying this story from Family Tales, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our powerful true life stories. Your support means everything to us. My name is Nellie Mae Harrison, and for 67 years, I believed family meant everything. I raised Bessie single-handedly after my husband Elijah's passing. I worked 2 cleaning jobs, the Rodwells and the Millers, to fund her college education. I hoarded every penny so she could have the dream wedding I'd always imagined for her. I pictured myself right there beside her at the ceremony, holding her hand, witnessing the fulfillment of every woman's deepest wish. But last Tuesday morning, while sipping coffee and scrolling through my phone, I stumbled upon a photograph that shattered my world. There was Bessie in an ivory gown beside her new husband, Devin Hayes. The only other people present were his parents, Franklin and Eleanor Hayes. My eyes traced every pixel of that picture repeatedly. Bessie looked luminous, her smile brighter than I'd ever witnessed. The caption underneath read, "Our perfect day, family complete." Family complete. Without me. No invitation. No phone call. No warning. I discovered my daughter's wedding the way a stranger discovers breaking news on the internet. My heart fractured in a way it hadn't even when Elijah died. Sitting in my Atlanta kitchen, the mug trembling in my grip, I realized that to Bessie, I might no longer exist as a mother, merely as an uncomfortable reminder of the past. I dialed her number 3 times that day. Each call went straight to voicemail. I texted, pretending ignorance, asking if she was all right, if she needed anything. Her response finally arrived late afternoon. "I'm good, Mama. We'll catch up later. We'll catch up later." As if her own daughter's wedding were some trivial matter that could wait. That night, lying in darkness staring at the ceiling, I understood that I'd spent my entire existence being a mother to someone who no longer wanted me. And in that pre-dawn silence, a different Nellie Mae began to awaken inside me. But what happened next would change both our lives in ways neither of us could have imagined. Over the following days, recollections crashed over me like relentless waves. I remember Bessie at 5 years old fighting pneumonia. I worked all day scrubbing the Rodwell family's Buckhead mansion, then sewed into the night for the Millers in Sandy Springs. For 15 days straight, I survived on 3 hours of sleep, nursing her, driving to appointments, purchasing expensive medications. When she finally recovered, she wrapped her small arms around me and whispered, "Mama, when I'm grown up and get married, you're going to be the most beautiful maid of honor ever." Those words had lived in my chest for over 20 years. I also recalled her 16th birthday celebration. I'd been saving for 2 years to create an unforgettable party. I pawned my wedding jewelry. I worked extra weekend shifts. I denied myself basic necessities. We rented the Magnolia Room in Midtown. I purchased the most stunning dress I could afford. I hired a talented DJ. I personally prepared all the soul food. That evening, Bessie told me I was the best mother on earth, that she'd remember my sacrifices forever. Guests remarked that love was visible in every single detail. I thought about the daily sacrifices, mornings rising at 5 to prepare her breakfast before school, Afternoons helping with homework despite my own limited education, nights staying awake worrying whenever she went out with friends, Sundays bringing collard greens and ham hocks to Auntie Dolores's house so Bessie could connect with her father's relatives. When she started college studying business administration, I increased my hours. I cleaned the Rodwells Monday through Friday, then catered social events on weekends. I wanted her to focus solely on studying, unburdened by financial stress. Whenever my knees throbbed after endless hours standing or my hands cracked from harsh chemicals, I thought about the brilliant future Bessie would have because of her education. During those college years, she began transforming subtly. She stopped coming straight home after classes. Study sessions, group assignments, extracurricular activities filled her schedule. Weekends meant going out with friends to places completely foreign to me. When I inquired about her day, responses grew briefer, more distant. "It was okay, Mama. I'll tell you another time." But another time never arrived. We're halfway through Nellie's story here on Family Tales, and things are about to take a dramatic turn. If this resonates with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear this message about self-respect and boundaries. During her senior year, she met Devin Hayes. The first time she mentioned him, I noticed a particular sparkle in her eyes. She discussed him constantly, how intelligent he was, how he came from a respectable family, how he harbored ambitious goals. I felt happy seeing her happy, but I also experienced a pang of something unidentifiable. It felt as if Devin represented a world where I didn't belong, a future with no room for a mother who cleaned strangers' homes. The first time Devin joined us for dinner, I prepared baked mac and cheese, fried chicken, candied yams, cornbread, and sweet tea. I put forth more effort than ever, wanting to create a positive impression. Devin was polite and well-mannered, but I caught his eyes surveying our modest home with an expression I couldn't interpret. Bessie seemed anxious, constantly explaining things as though she had to justify our lifestyle. "Your home is quite nice, Mrs. Harrison," Devin said when departing. But something in his inflection made me feel he'd communicated the opposite. That evening, Bessie informed me I'd been overly intense, asking too many questions about his family, his career, his plans. "Mama, not everyone is like us," sharing their entire life story in the first meeting. That was the first time I felt viewed as a problem requiring a solution. From then forward, Devin's visits became infrequent. When he came, conversations stayed superficial, formal. Bessie started spending more time with him, returning home later and later. Sunday family gatherings became occasional, then sporadic, until they vanished completely. "Devin and I have plans" became her most common phrase. But I had no idea that this was only the beginning of my exclusion from my daughter's life. And what I would discover next would force me to make the most difficult decision any mother could face. When Bessie graduated, I wept throughout the entire ceremony. She'd accomplished what I never could, earning a college degree. She'd have opportunities I'd never known. After graduation, we celebrated at an upscale restaurant in Decatur. Devin had invited his parents, Franklin and Eleanor Hayes. It was my first formal meeting with them. Franklin managed a large corporation in Sandy Springs. Eleanor had taught for years before retiring. They discussed international trips, exclusive restaurants, Broadway productions. I attempted participating in conversations, but felt like a fish stranded on shore. When I mentioned my housecleaning work, an awkward stillness felt that Bessie quickly filled by changing subjects. That evening when we returned home, Bessie said something that wounded me deeply. "Mama, I know you're always trying to be friendly, but sometimes you say things that could be misunderstood. Devin's parents are very cultured people." Cultured? That word lodged in my mind. I wasn't cultured. My love, my sacrifices, my devotion, none of it counted against money and formal education. The following months marked increasing separation. Bessie secured a position at a major international firm. Devin also landed a good job. They began discussing getting their own place, renting an apartment together. I supported the idea, though my heart shattered internally. Young people need their independence, I said, feigning enthusiasm. When they finally moved into an upscale Atlanta neighborhood, I remained welcome, but with conditions and scheduled appointments. Mama, you should call ahead to check if we're available, Bessie told me. The spontaneity of simply dropping by to visit my daughter died forever. Now I needed to book an appointment as if visiting a physician or dentist. Visits grew increasingly spaced. First weekly, then bi-weekly, then monthly. When I visited, conversations centered on their careers, their ambitions, their friends. I listened intently, but they rarely inquired about my life. It was as though I existed solely for them, as if my only identity was being Bessie's mother. During last year's holiday season, I noticed Bessie and Devin spending more time with the Hayes family. Well, Devin's parents have such lovely traditions, Bessie explained when I asked if they'd join me for Christmas Eve dinner as we'd always done. But next year we'll host, okay? Next year never materialized. Or rather, it arrived without me. In February, Bessie mentioned she and Devin were considering marriage. That's wonderful, baby, I exclaimed, feeling joy mixed with anticipation. I immediately began mental planning. The church, the dress, the flowers, the food. Have you chosen a date? How can I contribute? Mama, we want something simple, Bessie said. But something evasive flickered in her expression. Nothing too elaborate. Weddings aren't as complicated as they used to be. I nodded, though disappointment stirred inside. I dreamed for years about helping plan my only daughter's wedding. Months passed and wedding discussions became vague and irregular. When I asked about specific details, Bessie always had the identical response. We're still figuring it out, Mama. I'll update you once we've finalized something. I began sensing something wasn't right, but couldn't identify what exactly. In May, I noticed Bessie posting more photographs on Facebook, pictures with Devin with the Hayes family at elegant restaurants in locations I didn't recognize. But when we met in person, she shared very little about these occasions. It was as if she maintained two parallel lives. One she shared with me and one she lived in secret. And then came that Tuesday morning that would change everything forever. The morning I would discover the truth that would force me to choose between my daughter and my own dignity. Early June, I started suspecting something was definitely wrong. Bessie canceled 3 consecutive plans to see me, always with excuses about work or urgent obligations. When we finally met, she seemed distracted, nervous. I asked directly if everything was all right with Devin, if there was trouble. Everything's perfect, Mama, she said, avoiding my eyes. It's just that we're incredibly busy with work and other things. Other things. Those words resonated in my mind for days. What other things could be more important than including her mother in her life? The last time I spoke with Bessie before discovering the truth was on a Sunday afternoon. I called to invite her for breakfast the following Tuesday. I can't, Mama, she said. I have a critical meeting that morning. That was strange because Tuesday mornings had always been our special time since she was small. It was the only day I didn't work at the Rodwell's house. How about Wednesday then? I pressed. I'm not sure, Mama. Let me review my schedule and I'll call you back. But she never called back. And I, as always, waited patiently for a call that would never come. It was that Tuesday morning, exactly when I should have been having breakfast with my daughter, that I sat in my kitchen with coffee and a slice of pecan Danish. I logged onto Facebook to view neighbors' photos and their grandchildren, and stumbled upon the image that would transform my life forever. There was Bessie, more stunning than ever, in an elegant yet simple wedding dress, smiling beside Devin in what was clearly a marriage ceremony. In the background were the beaming faces of Franklin and Eleanor Hayes, dressed impeccably, posing as the only witnesses to that moment that should have been mine too. The photo's description read, "Finally married. Grateful to our families for making this day perfect." Our families, plural. But I didn't appear anywhere. I wasn't in the photograph. I wasn't in the comments. I wasn't in that narrative that was supposed to include my entire life. I read every comment on that post. College friends congratulating, coworkers sending blessings, some distant relatives expressing surprise they hadn't heard about the wedding. But no comment mentioned my absence. It was as if I'd never existed in Bessie's life, as if those 28 years of sacrifice and love had been completely erased from her personal history. I spent the remainder of that day in shock. I checked my phone repeatedly, hoping for a call, a text, an explanation. Nothing. Bessie continued her normal life, posting honeymoon photographs, thanking people for congratulations, sharing moments of happiness from which I'd been completely excluded. That night, lying sleepless and staring at my bedroom ceiling, I understood something that hurt more than I'd imagined possible. My daughter hadn't forgotten to include me in her wedding. She had consciously excluded me. She'd made a deliberate choice that I would not be part of the most important day of her life. And in that moment of painful clarity, I knew that my life, as I'd known it until then, was finished forever. But what Bessie didn't realize was that her mother, Nellie Mae, had accumulated much more than just pain during all those years of sacrifice. She'd also accumulated a strength she herself didn't know she possessed, a dignity that had been dormant but never deceased, and a capacity for decision that was about to change everything forever. The woman who rose from that bed on Wednesday morning was no longer the same woman who'd patiently waited to be included in her daughter's life. She was a woman who'd finally understood that some absences speak louder than any presence, and that sometimes the greatest love a mother can demonstrate is respect for her own dignity. This is Family Tales, where we share real stories about life, family, and the courage it takes to choose yourself. If Nellie's journey is touching your heart, please leave a comment sharing which city you're watching from. And don't forget, that like button really helps us continue bringing these important stories to you. In that silent pre-dawn hour in Atlanta, as the bells of St. Jude's Episcopal Church rang at 3 a.m., Nellie Mae Harrison made the first completely self-directed decision she'd made in nearly 30 years. If she was no longer welcome in Bessie's life, then Bessie would no longer be welcome in hers. But this story was just beginning, and what came next would transform the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have anticipated. The following days passed in a thick haze that obscured where my life was heading. Bessie didn't call to explain, didn't appear at the house, didn't show any sign of regret. She continued posting honeymoon photographs from Cabo San Lucas, Mexico, as if nothing had occurred, as if I were merely another follower on her social media. Every new photograph confirmed that I truly was no longer part of her life. I attempted staying busy with household tasks, with Wednesday Mass at St. Jude's, with conversations with Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, my lifelong neighbor. But no matter how I tried concealing it, the pain persisted. A deep ache in my chest, like a constant presence making breathing difficult. It was while sorting through old documents in the wooden trunk that had belonged to my mother that the memories came flooding back with full force. I found birth certificates, vaccination records I'd kept so carefully, school report cards where Bessie always earned straight A's. I remembered every sacrifice, the early morning sewing dresses for neighborhood ladies to pay for Bessie's English classes, the times I ate nothing but toast and jam so she could have meat on her plate, the birthday gifts I saved for all year to purchase. I recalled times she came home crying because her friends wore designer clothes, and I'd go to Sweet Auburn Curb Market the next day to buy exactly what she wanted, even if it meant delaying that month's rent. Throughout all those years, Bessie always had an excuse for not fully including me in her life. First, it was her studies, then work, then her boyfriend Devin, who didn't get along with mothers-in-law. I always accepted. I always understood. I always adapted to her schedule, her whims, her decisions. But now, looking back, I realized I'd become smaller and smaller in her life, occupying increasingly minimal spaces until reaching the point of not even knowing she was getting married. The Bessie I raised, the one I loved unconditionally, the one I always prioritized, had become a stranger who only shared fragments of attention when it suited her. That Thursday afternoon, while organizing family photographs into a shoebox, I found one that made me cry harder than I'd cried in years. It was from Bessie's confirmation ceremony. She was 8 years old, wearing a beautiful white dress I'd asked a local seamstress to create. In the photo, Bessie was embracing me tightly, smiling with pure, genuine happiness. I was smiling too, but now I could see in my eyes from that time something I'd lost, the certainty that I was loved unconditionally by my daughter. I remembered that day perfectly. I'd saved for 6 months for that celebration. I rented the Magnolia Room Hall. I invited the entire family. I prepared barbecue, potato salad, sweet tea, and a huge red velvet cake I'd specially ordered. Bessie felt like a princess, running from table to table, introducing me to everyone as my mama, the most beautiful in the world. That evening, when everyone had departed, she helped me clear the dishes and said, "Mama, when I'm grown and have my own parties, you're always going to be the most important person. Always." Tears streamed down my cheeks as I held that photograph. What happened to that little girl who promised me I'd always be the most important person? When did I become so insignificant that I didn't even deserve to be present at her wedding? I continued examining photographs and found another that hurt just as much. Bessie at 15, the day of her sweet 16 party. We'd rented a hall in the Midtown neighborhood. There was a DJ, food for 150 people, and a live band for the waltz. I'd worked double shifts for an entire year to give her that party. I cleaned houses by day, babysat children at night, sold sweet potato pies at the farmer's market on weekends, all to see her happy, to give her the celebration she deserved. In that photo, Bessie and I were dancing together, mother and daughter, during one of the songs. She'd requested I play a song she called our special song. "Mama, you used to sing this to me when I was little and sick, and it always made me feel better," she told me. "I want us to dance to it together so everyone knows how much I love you." Those words echoed in my mind like sounds from another life. How had I gone from being the person who comforted her when she was ill to being someone she was ashamed of in front of her new family? But what I discovered next would give me the strength I needed to make the most important decision of my life. I kept looking and found a letter Bessie had written me when she was 18, just before starting college. She'd written it on pink paper with careful handwriting full of little drawn hearts in the margins. It read, "Dearest Mama, tomorrow I begin a new chapter in my life. But I want you to know that nothing I achieve will be possible without everything you've done for me. You are my hero, my role model, the bravest woman I know. When I grow up, I want to be a mother like you, loving, selfless, who always puts family first. I love you with all my heart, and you'll always be the most important person in my life. Your loving daughter, Bessie." I read that letter 3 times before I could believe what I was reading. This was the same person who just excluded me from the most important day of her life. The same one who'd promised me I'd always be the most important person. I sat on my bed with the letter shaking in my hands and cried like I hadn't cried since the day I buried Elijah. I cried for the girl who wrote those words and for the woman she'd become. I cried for all the dreams I'd had about being the mother of the bride. I cried for all the times I'd imagined helping her choose the dress, organizing the bridal shower, walking her down the aisle. I cried for the mother-daughter relationship I thought we had, which apparently only existed in my imagination. After the crying came rage, a rage I'd never felt in my 67 years. How dare she treat me like this after everything I'd done for her? How could she be so cruel, so ungrateful? I'd sacrificed my youth, my social life, my own dreams, all for her. I'd worked until my bones ached so she could have opportunities I'd never had. And this was how she repaid me, with humiliation, exclusion, and oblivion. But after the rage came something worse, shame. I started questioning whether somehow it was my fault. Had I been too intense, too clingy, too unsophisticated for Bessie's new refined life? I remembered the faces of Franklin and Eleanor Hayes when they met me, that subtle expression I hadn't been able to interpret then, but that I now understood clearly. Pity mixed with discomfort. To them, I was the embarrassing mother-in-law who had to be tolerated, not accepted. I stood up from the bed and looked at myself in the vanity mirror. There was Nellie Mae Harrison, 67 years old, gray hair, hands rough from so much work, wrinkles around my eyes that spoke of years of worry. I wasn't elegant like Eleanor Hayes. I hadn't traveled the world. I didn't speak other languages. I didn't know about fine wines or theater. I was a simple woman who'd done the best she could with what she had. But did that make me less valuable? Did that justify my own daughter treating me like I didn't exist? I couldn't sleep that night. I stayed awake thinking about all the signs I'd ignored, all the moments I should have realized I was losing my daughter, the family dinners that became sporadic, the phone calls that got shorter, the visits that required prior appointments. Everything had been gradual, so subtle that I hadn't realized I was being systematically excluded from Bessie's life. On Friday morning, I decided to call my sister, Auntie Rosa, who lives in Birmingham, Alabama. I needed to talk to someone, vent, ask for advice. Auntie Rosa had always been the most direct of my sisters, the one who told things straight. "She got married without telling you?" Auntie Rosa shouted when I told her what had happened. "That girl has lost her mind. How can a daughter do that to her mother?" I told her the whole story, from the first changes in Bessie's attitude to the discovery of the wedding on Facebook. Auntie Rosa listened without interrupting, which was rare for her. "Nellie Mae," she finally said in a serious voice, "I always told you that you gave too much to that girl. You spoiled her since she was little. You put her on a pedestal and now you see the consequences. Children need boundaries. They need to understand that respect is earned and maintained." Her words hurt because I knew they contained the truth. I'd always indulged Bessie. I'd always given in to her tantrums. I'd always put her needs before mine. But I'd done it out of love, because I wanted her to have everything I couldn't have. "So what am I supposed to do now?" I asked, sobbing. "Now you're going to do what you should have done years ago," Auntie Rosa replied firmly. "You're going to live for yourself. Bessie has already made her decision about what place you occupy in her life. Now it's your turn to decide what place she occupies in yours." After hanging up with Auntie Rosa, I sat in the kitchen for hours thinking about her words. She was right. Bessie had clearly demonstrated what place I occupied in her new life. None. It was time for me to also make a decision about what place she would occupy in my new life. And what I decided to do next would shock everyone, including myself. On Saturday morning, as I drank my coffee and ate my pecan Danish, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but when I answered, I heard Bessie's voice. "Mama, how are you?" she asked in a cheerful voice, as if nothing had happened. "Guess what? We're back from our honeymoon. Cabo was incredible. Devin and I want to stop by this afternoon to tell you everything." To tell me everything? After 2 weeks of silence, after excluding me from her wedding, now she wanted to tell me everything as if I were a casual friend she was catching up with about her vacation? "What time are you planning to come?" I asked. "Around 5. We'll bring pictures and some gifts we bought you." Souvenirs from Cabo San Lucas could compensate for the greatest humiliation of my life? "All right," I said. "I'll be here." After hanging up, I stood there with the phone in my hand, feeling a mix of emotions I didn't know how to manage. Part of me was happy to finally see my daughter, to be able to embrace her and tell her how much I'd missed her. But another part of me, a part that grew with every passing hour, was furious at the coldness with which she'd treated me, at the casual way she assumed everything would be fine after what she'd done. I spent the rest of the day cleaning the house, making sweet tea, and buying fresh pecan Danish from the local bakery. It was what I always did when Bessie came to visit. I made sure everything was perfect to receive her. But this time, as I mopped the floor and dusted the furniture, I wondered why I was still trying so hard for someone who clearly didn't value my efforts. At 5 on the dot, Bessie and Devin arrived. Bessie looked radiant, tanned from the beach sun, wearing new clothes, looking completely happy. Devin wore a courteous but distant smile, the same one he always had when he came to my house. "Mama!" Bessie exclaimed, embracing me as if we were the best friends in the world. "I missed you so much. Look how tanned I got." I hugged her back, inhaling her expensive perfume, not the same one she used when she lived with me. Everything about her was different. Her clothes, her hairstyle, her way of speaking. It was as if the Bessie I knew had been replaced by a new, improved version that didn't include me. "Have a seat," I said. I served them sweet tea and offered them fresh pecan Danish. "Oh, Mama, this looks delicious," Bessie said, but I noticed she barely touched the pastry. She probably didn't eat that kind of thing anymore. Her new sophisticated life didn't include treats from the neighborhood bakery. "All right, tell me everything," I said, sitting across from them in my small living room. "How was the wedding?" Bessie exchanged a quick glance with Devin before answering. "It was really lovely, Mama. Very simple, just like we wanted. Nothing too elaborate." "Oh, and where was it?" I asked, though my heart was already sinking. "In a beautiful little chapel in Decatur. Very intimate, very private. Just us and Devin's parents as witnesses." Just them and Devin's parents. As if I didn't exist. As if 28 years of raising her didn't give me the right to be there. "And why didn't you tell me anything?" I finally asked, my voice trembling. Bessie sighed and put on the face she used to make when she was a child caught doing something wrong. "Mama, it all happened so quickly. You know how those bureaucratic things are. Suddenly the date came up and we decided not to complicate things. Besides, you know I never liked big parties." It was a lie. Bessie had always loved big parties. Her sweet 16, her graduation. All the celebrations we'd shared had been with lots of guests, lots of food, lots of joy. But now, for her wedding, she decided she wanted an intimate affair that didn't include me. "But Mama," Bessie continued in a syrupy voice, "that's why we came today, to celebrate with you. Look at all the gifts we brought you." She pulled out a bag full of typical souvenirs from Cabo. A ceramic ashtray, some seashells, a t-shirt that read, "I love Cabo," some coconut candies. Gifts they probably bought at the airport thinking, "Oh, we should bring something back for Bessie's mom." "Thank you, baby," I said, feeling like each gift was a slap in the face disguised as kindness. We spent 2 hours talking about the honeymoon, the places they visited, the fancy restaurants where they ate, the activities they did. It was like looking at vacation photos of strangers. I nodded, smiled, and asked appropriate questions. But inside, I felt like something was breaking for good. When they left, after vague promises to see each other soon and an invitation to visit the new apartment, I was left alone in my living room, surrounded by the cheap souvenirs, feeling the weight of the silence they'd left behind. That night, as I stored the gifts in a drawer where I knew I'd never see them again, I made a decision that would change everything. If Bessie could live without including me in the important moments of her life, then I could also learn to live without including her in the important moments of mine. And in that silence of the early morning, with my heart still hurting but with a new determination growing inside me, I started planning the first step of my new life. A life where I was the protagonist, not just the sacrificial mother waiting for crumbs of attention. Nellie Mae, who had waited all her life for others to decide her place in the world, died that night. The one who would wake up the next day would be a completely different woman. A woman who'd finally understood that respect is taught by example, and that sometimes the greatest love a mother can show is love for her own dignity. And my first step toward freedom would be more radical than anyone could have imagined. Sunday dawned with a clear sky that completely contrasted with the storm I carried inside. I rose earlier than usual, at 5 a.m., and for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel that heaviness in my chest that had accompanied me since discovering the wedding. In its place was something different. A cold clarity I'd never experienced before. It was as if during the night I'd gone through a silent transformation, as if Nellie Mae, who'd waited all her life for others to define her place in the world, had finally awakened from a very long sleep. I made my black coffee stronger than usual. I needed my mind to be completely clear for what I was about to do. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast for the last 15 years, where I'd waited for so many calls from Bessie that never came, where I'd planned special meals for visits that were canceled at the last minute. But this morning, that table no longer represented waiting or disappointment. It represented the place where Nellie Mae Harrison was going to make the most important decision of her life. I took out an old notebook where I used to write down Bessie's doctor's appointments when she was little, important school dates, her friends' birthdays. Now I was going to use those yellowed pages to plan something completely different, my definitive exit from a life where I was no longer welcome. On the first page I wrote, "Plan for Independence, Nellie Mae Harrison, August 12, 2024. The date looked strange written in my shaky handwriting, but the words felt more real than anything I'd felt in years. The first thing I wrote was, "Assess resources." During all those years of sacrifice, I'd managed to save a considerable amount. I wasn't rich, but I wasn't unprotected either. I had the savings of a lifetime of work, a small but owned house in an area that had become very valuable, and something Bessie never knew, a secret bank account where I'd deposited the extra money I'd earned sewing dresses for neighborhood ladies on weekends for years. I'd opened that account when Bessie turned 18, thinking it would be my wedding gift to her. Every dollar I deposited there, I did so imagining the moment I would give it to her. "My daughter, this is so you can start your marriage without debt, so you can have your own home, so you don't go through the difficulties I did." For 10 years, I'd nourished that account with the illusion of seeing the happy look on Bessie's face when she found out about the surprise. But now, after being excluded from her wedding, that money would take a completely different path. The second point on my list was, research housing options. I couldn't stay in this house where every corner reminded me of the years of waiting, where every phone call would make me think it might be Bessie seeking reconciliation. I needed a new place, a space that was completely mine, where I could build a life that didn't depend on crumbs of attention from my daughter. I remembered that Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, my lifelong neighbor, had always told me about her sister Gloria, who'd moved to a residential community for older adults in Decatur. "It's wonderful, Nellie," Mrs. Rodriguez had told me several times. "There are activities, security, people our age. Gloria says she's never felt so free in her life." At the time, I thought those places were for people who didn't have family to care for them. Now I understood they were for people who decided to care for themselves. The third point was the most painful but the most necessary: gradually cut ties. I couldn't just disappear overnight because that would cause unnecessary drama and give Bessie reasons to justify her behavior. My mom was always so dramatic. That's why we didn't include her in important things. No, my exit had to be as silent and dignified as my entry into Devin Hayes's life had been, gradual, respectful, but definitive. After breakfast, I showered and put on my Sunday navy blue dress, the one I wore to Mass at St. Jude's. But this morning I wasn't going to church. I was going to begin the most important investigation of my life. I grabbed my purse, put the notebook inside, and left my house with a determination I hadn't felt in years. My first stop was the bank. It was strange walking the streets of my neighborhood, knowing that every step took me away from the life I'd known for 67 years. Mr. Fernando Lawson, the executive who'd managed my accounts for the last 10 years, was surprised to see me near the ATM on a Sunday morning. "Good morning, Mrs. Harrison." He greeted me when he recognized me. "Everything all right?" "Perfect, Mr. Lawson," I replied with a smile I didn't expect to have. "I'm just reviewing my financial options. I might need to make some moves this week." "Of course, ma'am. I'm available Monday if you'd like to review your accounts in detail." "I appreciate it very much. I'll see you on Monday then." That small conversation gave me more energy than I expected. For the first time in years, Someone spoke to me like a person capable of making important financial decisions, not like an old lady who needed others to manage her money. From there, I went straight to Decatur, to the residential community Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned. It was called the Legacy at Peachtree, and as soon as I got off the bus, I could see why my neighbor's sister liked it so much. It was a beautiful, clean place with well-kept gardens and an atmosphere of tranquility I hadn't felt in years. The receptionist, a very kind woman named Patricia, welcomed me with a genuine smile when I explained I was interested in seeing the facilities. "I'm glad you came," she said enthusiastically. "We just happen to have 2 very nice apartments available. Would you like a full tour?" For the next 2 hours, Patricia showed me every corner of the Legacy at Peachtree. The apartments were small but comfortable, perfect for one person. They had a living dining room, 1 bedroom, a full bathroom, and an equipped kitchenette. What I liked most was the balcony overlooking the gardens, where I could imagine myself drinking my coffee in the mornings and watching the sunset in the evenings. "We have lots of activities," Patricia explained as we walked through the common areas. "Mondays we have yoga class. Tuesdays are for knitting and crafts. Wednesdays are mass in the internal chapel. Thursdays are ballroom dancing. And Fridays are movie nights. On weekends we organize excursions to different places: Savannah, Charleston, Asheville." Every activity she mentioned sounded like something I might enjoy, things I'd never done because I was always waiting for Bessie's schedule availability. "And are the people who live here happy?" I asked. "Look, Mrs. Harrison," Patricia told me honestly, "most of our residents come here after complicated family situations. Some have lost their partners. Others have children who live far away. Others simply decided they wanted to live with more independence. At first many arrive sad, nostalgic. But after a few months you see them transformed. Happier, more active, more, how should I put it, more alive." Her words resonated deeply with me. More alive. How long had it been since I truly felt alive? How many years had I spent simply existing, waiting for my daughter to include me in her life? "What are the requirements to live here?" I asked. Patricia explained the whole process. I had to be over 60 years old, check. Have stable income to cover the monthly fee. I had savings for several years. And pass a basic medical evaluation to ensure I could live independently. My health was excellent. The monthly cost included maintenance, security, activities, and basic utilities. It was a considerable amount but perfectly manageable with my savings. "How long does the admission process take?" I asked. "If you bring all the documents this week, we could have everything ready in 2 weeks, Patricia replied. "Are you interested in any of the apartments you saw?" I looked again toward the balcony of the apartment I liked most, the one facing the garden, where I'd seen several residents chatting animatedly under the shade of a big tree. In that moment I made a decision that surprised even me with how quick and clear it was. "I'll take the one with the balcony facing the gardens," I said without hesitation. "Excellent decision," exclaimed Patricia. "That's one of the most requested. Here's the list of documents you need to bring, and the contract for you to review carefully." I returned home that afternoon with a feeling I hadn't experienced in years. Genuine Bessie. Not the Bessie that Bessie would change. Not the Bessie that things would go back to how they were. But the Bessie of a new life that depended solely on my own decisions. That night, instead of watching TV as I did every Sunday, I dedicated myself to organizing my documents: birth certificate, proof of income, bank statements, identification. It was strange preparing paperwork to start a new life at 67, but every document I organized made me feel more certain of my decision. On Monday morning, I went to the bank exactly at 9 a.m. when they opened. Mr. Fernando Lawson greeted me with the same professional courtesy as always. But when I explained that I needed to make some major moves in my accounts for a personal investment, I noticed a respect in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. "Mrs. Harrison, I'm delighted to hear you're making proactive financial decisions," he said as he reviewed my bank statements. I see you've been very disciplined with your savings all these years. You have very solid resources. Hearing those words filled me with a confidence I didn't know I had. For so many years, I'd lived with the mindset that I was a person of limited resources, someone who depended on the charity of others. But the reality was that I'd worked hard, saved diligently, and built a solid financial foundation without anyone's help. I need to make a significant transfer to my checking account, I explained. And I also want to know about safe investments that give me monthly income. For the next hour, Mr. Lawson explained different investment options that could give me regular income without touching the principal capital. It was information I'd never sought out before because I always thought my money was meant exclusively for emergencies or for helping Bessie. Now I saw that I had options that I could make my money work for me instead of just keeping it for others. From there, I went directly to the office of Mr. Michael Sanders, a lawyer Mrs. Rodriguez had recommended to me years ago when I had trouble with some house documents. I needed to make sure all my assets were in order, and more importantly, I needed to update my will. Mrs. Harrison, what brings you here? Mr. Sanders asked when I entered his office. I need to update my will and better organize my assets, I told him directly. If he was surprised by the nature of my visit, he didn't show it. For the next 40 minutes, we reviewed all my property documents, bank accounts, and insurance policies. It was impressive to see it all together. I really had built a considerable estate through pure work and discipline. Do you have any specific changes in mind for the will? He asked. Yes, I replied without hesitation. I want to leave 50% of my assets to charitable institutions that help working single mothers, and the other 50% to my daughter, but with one condition. What kind of condition? That she can only access the inheritance after writing a letter explaining why she made certain decisions about our relationship. She doesn't have to apologize. She just has to be honest about her reasons. That letter must be delivered to you as a witness, but she must write it, even if I'm no longer here to read it. Mr. Sanders wrote everything down carefully. That's a very thoughtful condition, Mrs. Harrison. It gives her an opportunity for reflection without forcing a reconciliation. Exactly, I confirmed. I'm not looking for revenge, Mr. Sanders. I'm looking for her to understand that actions have consequences, even the actions of children toward their parents. When I left the lawyer's office, I felt like a completely different person. I'd taken total control of my financial situation, secured my future, and established clear boundaries for my relationship with Bessie, even after my death. But the hardest part of my transformation was yet to come, and it would test every ounce of strength I discovered within myself. The following days passed in a flurry of activity that kept me busy and focused. I hired a moving service to assess my belongings. I decided to keep only the essentials, clothes, some small furniture, important photos, objects with real sentimental value. Everything else would be donated or sold. The hardest part was deciding what to do with Bessie's things that I still kept in her room. School trophies, books, clothes she'd left when she moved out. I finally decided to carefully pack everything in labeled boxes and leave them in a storage unit I rented near her apartment. If she ever wanted them, she could pick them up. If not, eventually they'd be donated. During that week, Bessie called me twice. The conversations were courteous but distant on both sides. She told me about her new job, her plans to decorate the apartment, the dinners she had with the Hayes family. I listened politely, asked appropriate questions, but I didn't share anything about my own plans. For the first time in years, I had important secrets that did not include my daughter. "Is everything okay, Mama?" she asked on the second call. "You sound different." "Everything is perfect, baby," I replied with complete honesty. "I'm just organizing some things at the house. You know how it is. Do you need help with anything?" The question would have thrilled me before. Now it simply confirmed that Bessie still saw me as someone who needed help, not as someone capable of solving her own problems. No thank you, baby. Everything is under control. On Friday of that week, I got the call from Patricia at the Legacy at Peachtree. My application had been approved, and I could move in the following Monday if I wanted. That night, alone in my house, surrounded by packed boxes and furniture covered with sheets, I didn't feel sadness or nostalgia. I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades, the excitement of starting something new. On Saturday morning, as I had my last coffee at the kitchen table where I'd planned so many special meals for Bessie, my phone rang. It was her. Mama, Devin and I want to invite you to dinner tomorrow Sunday. We're going to try out the new dining room at the apartment. It was the invitation I'd waited for months. They finally wanted to include me in something. Show me their new home. Treat me like a part of their life. But it was too late. Oh baby, that's a shame, I replied in a serene voice. I already have plans for tomorrow. Plans? With who? With some new friends. We're going on a little day trip to Lake Lanier. It wasn't a lie. The residents of the Legacy at Peachtree had a trip scheduled for Sunday, and I'd already signed up. But Mama, we can change it to another day. It's important to us that you see our home. Thank you, baby. But I'm already committed. Maybe another time when I have more availability. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Bessie was not used to me having plans that didn't involve waiting for her. Well, okay. We'll organize something later. Sure, baby. Have a wonderful dinner. When I hung up, I stayed seated in that familiar kitchen for the last time, smiling with deep satisfaction. For the first time in my life, Bessie had had to adjust to my schedule instead of me adjusting to hers. It was a small change, but it symbolized a much bigger transformation. Nellie Mae Harrison had stopped being a woman waiting to be included, and had become a woman who had her own life, her own plans, her own happiness. On Sunday night, after returning from a beautiful day trip to Lake Lanier where I'd met 3 lovely women who would become my new neighbors, I packed my last personal belongings. The move would be early Monday, and by noon I would be settled in my new home. That last night in the house where I'd raised Bessie, I didn't cry or feel nostalgic. Instead, I felt a deep gratitude toward the woman I had been, and a genuine excitement for the woman I was becoming. I'd made the bravest decision of my life, choosing my own happiness over waiting for the approval of others. Early Monday, as the movers loaded my few belongings, I looked one last time at every room in the house. In Bessie's bedroom, now completely empty, I whispered a silent farewell. Thank you for teaching me that true love sometimes means knowing when to walk away. The Nellie Mae who walked out of that house that Monday morning was a completely new woman. A woman who'd learned that dignity is not negotiable, that respect is taught by example, and that it's never too late to start over when you make the right decision. As the moving truck drove away toward Decatur, toward my new life at the Legacy at Peachtree, I sat in the passenger seat, smiling toward the future. For the first time in 67 years, I didn't know exactly what awaited me, and that uncertainty felt like the most beautiful freedom in the world. My first week at the Legacy at Peachtree passed like a beautiful dream I didn't want to wake from. Every morning I woke in my new cozy apartment, made my coffee in the kitchenette that was entirely mine, and went out onto the balcony to look at the gardens where I'd already identified my new neighbors. There was Mrs. Mercedes, 72, who'd been an elementary school teacher for 40 years. Mrs. Delaner, 69, who'd worked in a government office and had fascinating stories of her youth. And Mr. Alexander, 75, a widower like me, who'd been a carpenter and now made small furniture pieces to give as gifts to his new friends. It was strange to feel part of a group where I was valued for who I was, not for what I could do for others. At community meals, my new friends asked me about my life, my opinions, my plans. No one saw me as somebody's mother or the awkward mother-in-law. I was simply Nellie Mae, a woman with her own stories, her own dreams, her own personality. On Wednesday of my first week, I participated in the knitting class led by Mrs. Eleanor Rodriguez, an elegant 74-year-old woman who'd been a dressmaker in her youth. While embroidering flowers on a napkin, I realized I hadn't done anything purely for pleasure in years, without thinking about whether Bessie would like it or if it would be useful for the house. "You know what, Nellie?" Mrs. Rodriguez said as she checked my work. "You have a real talent for this. You should come to every class." It was a simple compliment, but it touched my heart. How long had it been since I'd received recognition for something I'd done well? In my previous life, my achievements were always measured by how much they helped Bessie. Now, for the first time, someone valued my work for its own sake. Thursday was my first ballroom dancing class. Mr. Alexander Davis, a very distinguished 76-year-old man who'd been a physical education teacher, led the classes with contagious patience and joy. At first I was embarrassed because I hadn't danced in decades. But Mr. Davis reassured me. "No one judges here, Nellie," he said with a kind smile. "We come here to have fun and remember that it's never too late to learn new things." During that class I danced the cha-cha, the waltz, and even a little salsa. I laughed harder than I'd laughed in years. My classmates applauded when I managed a difficult step, helped me when I got confused, and made me feel like I was part of a real family. A family that had chosen me, and that I had chosen too. That night, as I ate dinner alone in my apartment but without feeling lonely, my phone rang. It was Bessie. "Mama, where are you?" she asked, her voice frantic. "I went to the house and it's completely empty. The neighbors said you moved out. What's going on?" Her voice had a mix of confusion and panic that I hadn't heard since she was little and got lost at the market. For a moment, my maternal instinct wanted to reassure her immediately, explain everything, assure her that I was fine. But the new Nellie Mae, who had emerged in these last few weeks, kept her composure. "I'm doing very well, baby," I replied in a serene voice. "I moved to a place more suitable for my age." "More suitable? What does that mean? Why didn't you tell me anything?" "Because they were personal decisions that didn't require your approval," I said firmly but without aggression. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Bessie was not used to me making important decisions without consulting her, even though she'd been making hers for years without consulting me. "Where are you living now?" "In a place where I'm happy, baby. That's what matters." "Mama, you're scaring me. This isn't normal for you. Are you mad at me about something?" The question would have disarmed me before. I would have rushed to explain that I wasn't mad, that I loved her, that I just wanted us to be happy together. But now I saw that question for what it really was, an attempt to return to the old dynamic where I was responsible for managing her emotions. "I'm not mad, Bessie. I'm living my life." "What does that mean?" "It means I finally understood that I have the right to make my own decisions, to have my own plans, to be happy without depending on the approval of others." Another silence. I could imagine Bessie on the other end trying to process this version of her mother she didn't know. "Can you tell me where you are? Devin and I are worried." Devin and I. It was always Devin and I, as if they were a single entity making joint decisions about my life. But there was something in Bessie's tone that was different. For the first time in a long time, she seemed genuinely worried about me, not just annoyed because I wasn't available when she needed me. "I'm at the Legacy at Peachtree in Decatur," I finally told her. "It's a very nice residential community for people my age." "A retirement home?" The word bothered me, but it didn't surprise me. To Bessie, any place where older people lived was automatically a retirement home. "No, baby. It's a place where I live independently, but with the company of people who are at the same stage of life as me. I have my own apartment, my own activities, my own social life." "Social life?" There was genuine surprise in her voice, as if she'd never considered that I could have a social life independent of her. "Yes, Bessie. I have new friends, activities I enjoy, plans that don't include waiting for you to have time for me." The words came out more direct than I'd planned, but I didn't regret saying them. It was time for Bessie to understand the consequences of her decisions. Mama, we've always had time for you. Did you really have time to include me in your wedding? The silence that followed was long and heavy. It was the first time I directly mentioned the wedding exclusion, and we both knew it was the elephant in the room that had been present in all our subsequent conversations. Mama, I already explained that it all happened so fast, that it was a very simple thing. Bessie, I interrupted her with a firm but calm voice. I'm not interested in hearing more excuses. What happened happened. I'm not looking for apologies or explanations. I just want you to understand that decisions have consequences. What kind of consequences? The consequences that I finally understood that I'm not a priority in your life, and I've decided that you won't be a priority in mine either. The words came out with a clarity that surprised me. There was no anger in my voice, no resentment. Only a quiet honesty that made me feel freer than I'd felt in years. Does that mean you don't want to be my mother anymore? The question hurt because I could hear the little girl behind the adult woman, but it also strengthened me because it reminded me that Bessie knew exactly what she had lost. I will always be your mother, baby, but I will no longer be the mother who waits for crumbs of your attention. I will no longer be the mother who accepts any treatment just to be present in your life. If you want a relationship with me, it will have to be a relationship of mutual respect. And what would that look like? It was the first time Bessie specifically asked what I wanted from our relationship, instead of simply assuming I would adapt to whatever she offered. I don't know yet, I answered honestly, but I know it can't be like before. After hanging up that night, I sat on my balcony watching the lights of Decatur, feeling a mix of sadness and liberation. It had been the hardest conversation of my life, but also the most necessary. For the first time, I'd set clear boundaries with my daughter. I'd expressed my feelings without trying to protect hers. I'd placed my dignity above my desire to keep the peace. And what happened next would determine whether Bessie truly understood what she'd lost, or whether she'd learned nothing at all. The following days passed without news from Bessie, and for the first time, her silence did not cause me anxiety. I was too busy discovering my new life to worry about interpreting her lack of communication. On Friday, I participated in the weekly excursion to downtown Atlanta, where we visited the Georgia State Capitol and ate at a traditional soul food restaurant near Centennial Olympic Park. On Saturday, I went to the yoga class for the first time in my life and discovered that my body was more flexible than I thought. On Sunday, after Mass at the chapel at the Legacy at Peachtree, I was returning to my apartment when Patricia, the receptionist, stopped me. "Mrs. Harrison, you have visitors," she said with a smile. "A young couple who say they're family." My heart sped up a little, but not with the anxiety of before. It was more curious to see what Bessie and Devin wanted. I found them in the visitors' lounge, sitting together on one of the elegant sofas. Bessie looked nervous, almost fragile, very different from the confident, successful woman she'd been in our last encounters. Devin looked uncomfortable, as if he'd rather be anywhere else. "Mama," Bessie said, standing up when she saw me, "thank you for seeing us." It was strange that she thanked me for seeing them, as if she finally understood that she could no longer simply appear in my life uninvited. "Have a seat," I said, taking the chair across from them. "How are you?" "We're fine," Bessie replied, though her voice suggested otherwise. "We wanted to come and see where you're living, to make sure you're comfortable." I looked around the visitors' lounge with its elegant furniture, its well-kept plants, its large windows that let in abundant natural light. Then I looked at them, this young couple who'd come to make sure I was comfortable, as if they had any right to approve of my life decisions. "As you can see, I'm very comfortable," I said with a genuine smile. "This place is perfect for me." "Yes, it looks very nice," Devin admitted, speaking for the first time. "It must be expensive, though." There it was. The real concern, not my happiness or my comfort, but how much of their inheritance I was spending. Fortunately, I can pay for it without problems, I replied calmly. It turns out I worked and saved more than you knew. I watched as Bessie and Devin exchanged a quick glance. It was obvious they'd talked about my financial situation before coming. Mama, we don't want you to run out of money by living in a place like this, Bessie said in a worried voice. Why would I run out of money? I asked with genuine curiosity. Well, you always told us you had to watch every dollar. That money didn't go very far. It's true that I watched every dollar, I confirmed, but it was because I was saving for you, to be able to help you when you needed it. Now that it's clear you don't need my help, I can use my money for my own happiness. What do you mean we don't need your help? Devin asked in a tense voice. I mean you are successful, independent adults capable of making your own decisions without consulting me, including decisions as important as getting married. If you're independent enough for that, then you don't need me to save my money for your emergencies. The silence that followed was uncomfortable. I could see how they processed the logic of my words, how they realized they couldn't have both. Total independence from me when it suited them and access to my resources when they needed them. Mama, Bessie said finally, her voice softer. Are you very angry with me? It was the question of a child, not an adult. And for the first time since the wedding, I felt a little compassion for her. But it was a different kind of compassion, not the blind compassion that had led me to excuse her behavior for years. I'm not angry, baby, I told her honestly. I'm disappointed. I'm sad. But above all, I'm at peace. At peace. At peace with finally understanding who I am beyond being your mother. At peace with having discovered that I can be happy without depending on your approval or your attention. Bessie remained silent for a moment, and I could see tears starting to form in her eyes. Does that mean you don't love me anymore? It was the question I'd been waiting for, and I had the answer ready. I love you more than you can imagine, Bessie. But I've learned that loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to disrespect you. I've learned that true love includes boundaries, includes dignity, includes mutual respect. And what can we do to fix this? Devin asked, speaking for the first time as if he truly cared about the answer. I looked at both of them, this young couple who'd come to fix the situation, probably hoping that with a visit and a few apologies, everything would return to normal. There's nothing to fix, I said calmly. I'm not broken. I'm not sick. I'm not acting out of spite. I'm simply living the life I deserve to live. But can we still be family? Bessie asked, her voice trembling. We will always be family, I assured her. But it will be a different kind of family. One where we respect each other, where we include each other in important things, where we treat each other as equal adults. How do we know what you expect from us? Devin asked. It was a practical question, and I appreciated his honesty. Bessie knows how to treat me with respect, I replied, looking directly at my daughter. She did it for many years when she was younger. She just needs to remember how to do it. Bessie nodded slowly, as if finally understanding that there was no quick fix, that she would have to do real work to rebuild our relationship. Can we call you sometimes? She asked in a small voice. Of course, I said, but I won't be available every time you call. I have my own life now, my own activities, my own commitments. It was strange saying those words. For 67 years, I'd never had commitments I couldn't cancel for Bessie. Now I had knitting classes, excursions, dinners with friends, a social life that was important to me. When they left that afternoon, after vague promises to maintain better communication and do things differently, I stayed seated in the visitors' lounge for a while longer, processing what had happened. There had been no dramatic reconciliation, no tears of remorse, no promises of immediate change. But there had been something more valuable, recognition. For the first time, Bessie had recognized that she'd treated me poorly, that she'd made decisions that hurt me, and that she would have to make a real effort if she wanted a relationship with me. That night during the community dinner in the dining hall at the Legacy at Peachtree, My new friends asked me about my visitors. Is everything okay with the family? Mrs. Mercedes asked with genuine concern. Everything is exactly as it should be, I replied with a smile. For the first time in years, everything is exactly as it should be. And it was true. I didn't know if Bessie and I would ever have a close relationship again. I didn't know if she would truly change or if she would simply learn how to manage me better. But I knew that I had changed forever, and that no matter what happened to our relationship, I would be fine. Nellie Mae, who had waited for years for her daughter to include her in her life, had died forever. In her place, a woman had been born who knew her worth, who had her own dreams, who was capable of being happy with or without the approval of others. And that transformation, painful as it had been, was worth more than any reconciliation that required me to return to being the small, subservient woman I'd been before. For the first time in my life, I was free. And that freedom felt like the most beautiful gift I'd given myself. But 6 months later, I would receive a letter from Bessie that would test everything I'd learned about forgiveness, boundaries, and the true meaning of family. Today, 6 months later, I wake up every morning in my small but cozy apartment. I look out the window and see a different world. It's not a world without pain, but it's a world where I choose who is part of my story. I tend to my plants on the patio. I read the books I always wanted to read. I frequent the new chapel where no one knows me as Bessie's mother. I'm simply Nellie Mae Harrison, a 67-year-old woman who's learning to live for herself after decades of living exclusively for others. Sometimes I get calls from unknown numbers that I know are Bessie trying to reach me through other people's phones. I hear her voice on the answering machine, always crying, always apologizing, always promising she'll change. But some exclusions cause pain too deep to be healed just with words. Some rejections are too final to be forgiven with simple remorse. Bessie had the opportunity to include me in the most important moment of her life, and she chose to leave me out. Now I choose to leave her out of my new life. During these months, I've learned that the loneliness I feared doesn't exist when you live in peace with yourself. My days are filled with activities that nourish my soul. Knitting classes with Mrs. Rodriguez, Thursday dances with Mr. Davis, weekend excursions where I discover parts of Georgia and the South I'd never visited. At community dinners, my friends listen to me attentively when I tell stories of my youth, when I share recipes I learned from my mother, when I give my opinion on the daytime soaps we watch together in the afternoons. Yesterday at the grocery store, a lady recognized me and told me that Bessie was offering a reward for anyone who knew my whereabouts. I smiled politely and replied that sometimes people find each other when they're ready to find each other. I don't feel rage. I don't feel vengeance. I don't feel hatred. I feel only the peace of someone who made the right decision at the right time. Bessie learned in the most painful way possible that mothers also have feelings, that love has boundaries, and that some doors once closed never open again. Last week, I received a very formal letter delivered by a lawyer. It was from Bessie, typed with no tears to smudge the ink, no shaky handwriting of emotion. In that letter, my daughter explained with a coldness that surprised me her reasons for excluding me from the wedding. She said it had been a practical decision, that the Hayes family had insisted on a small ceremony, that they hadn't wanted to hurt my feelings but hadn't wanted to create conflicts with her new in-laws either. I read that letter 3 times before fully understanding what I was reading. Bessie had reduced the most painful moment of my life to a practical decision. She'd turned my exclusion into a matter of family diplomacy. There was no recognition of the harm she'd caused me. There was no understanding of the sacrifice it had been for me to raise her alone. There was no gratitude for the years of unconditional love I'd given her. That letter confirmed something I already knew in my heart. The Bessie I'd raised, the girl who promised me I would always be the most important person in her life, had disappeared forever. In her place was a woman who viewed our relationship as a social obligation that could be managed with efficiency, not as a sacred bond that deserved care and respect. I put the letter away in a wooden box along with some old photographs that had resisted time. Not out of spite, but because some words only need to be read, not answered. A mother's love doesn't end. It just changes form. My love for Bessie transformed into something different. Respect for my own dignity, care for my own happiness, protection for my own peace. This morning, as I water the plants on my patio and watch the sunrise over Decatur, I think of all the women who, like me, have spent their lives waiting to be valued by others. I think of the mothers who sacrifice their dreams for children, who later see them as awkward burdens. I think of the grandmothers who babysit grandchildren, only to be told later they're interfering too much. I think of all of us who learned that our worth depended on how much we could give to others, never on how much we deserved to receive. To all those women, I would tell them what I now know. It's never too late to choose your own happiness. It's never too late to set boundaries. It's never too late to decide that you deserve respect, that you deserve consideration, that you deserve to be treated as the valuable person you've always been. The freedom I feel now was not born of punishing Bessie, but of freeing myself. It was not born of revenge, but of self-respect. It was not born of hatred, but of the self-love that had been dormant for too many years. Last night, after a community dinner, Mrs. Mercedes asked me if I ever regretted making this decision. "Don't you miss your daughter?" she asked with the kindness of someone genuinely concerned about my well-being. "I miss the daughter I thought I had," I replied honestly. "But I don't miss the relationship we actually had, because that relationship was slowly killing me. It is the purest truth I've ever spoken. For years, I lived a fantasy where I believed Bessie loved me the same way I loved her. The reality is that to Bessie, I was a convenience when she needed me and a nuisance when she didn't. Accepting that reality was painful, but it was also liberating. Today, I write these words from my patio, with the sound of the community garden fountain in the background, with the scent of the bougainvillea I planted last week, with the certainty that I chose the right path. I don't know what the future holds, but I know it will be a future where my happiness will not depend on the decisions of others. Sometimes the greatest acknowledgement is the silence one chooses to maintain. And in that silence, Nellie Mae Harrison finally found her voice, her strength, and her peace. This has been a Family Tales story. Did you connect with Nellie's journey? Which city are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, you can support us by sending a super thanks, so we can continue bringing more powerful stories like this. Thank you so much for your incredible support. I'm looking forward to reading your thoughts on this story. There's so much more on the Family Tales channel. Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. See you in the next life story. With love and respect. Family Tales.